Hello, everybody. We are here to ride the super hype train for the X-Men franchise. It left the station though. Nobody really cares about X-Men anymore.
Especially judging by the box office for the last film.
Right. But speaking of the last film, that's why we're doing this now. We could have done it beforehand, maybe, but we wanted to include Dark Phoenix in the lineup of ranking the X-Men movies from bottom to the top.
That's right. In case you didn't hear, there was a recent movie that came out in the X-Men franchise called Dark Phoenix.
Yes. It surprised many people when it came out for numerous reasons. But as it stands with this list, we will not be including the Deadpool movies, and I'm taking my cue from the marketing material from Dark Phoenix because I saw a number of trailers that were, about like the legacy of the X-Men franchise, and it included the original X-Men trilogy, the Wolverine trilogy, and then the new First Class era of movies, which are 10 movies altogether, but it didn't have anything about Deadpool in those X-Men legacy trailers and things. And mostly because Deadpool, might actually survive the Disney merger, unlike the rest of the X universe. They're maybe thinking about, keeping him around as Ryan Reynolds and everything. But we'll go ahead and get started. At the bottom of the list there's, as I said, 10 movies here. So just because it's at the bottom doesn't necessarily mean it's a terrible movie, even though many people will argue that there are terrible movies in this franchise. And they will argue to the death about that sort of thing. But I'm sure we'll hear some of that about this list as well. So, starting at number 10, what do you have?
For number 10, I have Logan. And with this movie, in all honesty, it would have to be the one that I'm least familiar with the X-Men series. I've seen most of them a number of times, but that's just not the case for this one. Again, coming in at number 10 doesn't mean it's the worst movie of all time, doesn't even mean it's a bad movie necessarily, but it means for my list, that's where it stands.
Okay, I already hear people complaining, because that's many people's favorite X-Men movie, but for number 10 I have The Wolverine. So, interesting that it's two Wolverine films at the bottom.
Right.
But I guess we'll get into that some later. To me, The Wolverine, like you said, it's not a bad film. I enjoyed it a lot when it came out. Upon rewatches, though, I think I got less interested every time. Because there's a lot of the movie in the middle there where they're just, roaming around Japan, which is fine. I mean, that can be a good movie, but it's not what people signed up for as a Wolverine movie, perhaps? I know that it's based on the classic comic book arc where he goes to Japan and all of that sort of thing, and that's great, but it didn't necessarily transfer to film as well as it should have. And, he loses his healing abilities from, a little mechanical spider wrapped around his heart. I don't know how that stops his healing his entire body. That's some magical technology there. And then a lot of people have a problem with the mecha suit at the end with the Silver Samurai. And I agree, that's kind of a lackluster finale sort of thing. But I will say that The Wolverine has one of the best post-credit scenes ever. Not just in the X-Men franchise, but just out of movies in general. Because when I first saw it in the theater, I kept thinking that it was going to end. But it didn't. It just kept going and giving information. I mean, it talks about Trask and everything. And then it shows Ian McKellen as Magneto. And then shows Patrick Stewart as Professor X, who had died in a previous movie, I remind you. And then that whole thing set up Days of Future Past, which is coming out the very next year. So, the movie, on the whole, The Wolverine, I'm kind of lukewarm on. It has good parts. There's the bullet train fight and all that, and the part at the beginning where he's in the wilderness and stuff, you can take it or leave it, but to me, it's just maybe on purpose it was the least sort of connected X-Men movie, but I feel like to me that makes it one of the worst. You have anything to say about that, or any more to say on Logan, maybe?
I think that's a fair assessment of the Wolverine. It won't be too long till we see it on my list, but we'll talk about it more then. Again, I'll remind that with my placement of Logan, more so than anything, it is an issue of familiarity, not an issue of actual critique.
That's fair. So, moving on to number 9, I have X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Are we going to see any non-Wolverine-based movies in here?
No.
Okay. Alright. For me, number 9 is X2.
Okay. Ouch. Again, that's another one that many people say is their all-time favorite.
Yep. Well, I'm not most people.
Alright, explain.
Well, with X2, it is, for me, one of my least favorite Wolverine movies.
Yeah, that's fair.
And for me, with a lot of with the earliest movies in the series, as much as I appreciate them and as much as they were necessary to start out the series, they are a product of their time, and they do not age as well as they could. So when I see X2, it is probably the green and grayest backdrop of any film, except maybe the Chamber of Secrets.
Ooh.
It's just a dated look, and the story's fine. I'm not actually complaining about the story in X2. Just realize that with X2 and Logan, not that they're the same movie, but it's both highly Wolverine based, and then you get an adamantium based counterpart.
That's fair.
Yeah. So there is that connection there. Do you have to love Nightcrawler though in the film?
Yeah.
And I'm partial to a James Marsden Cyclops always, but it's a good movie.
Cyclops is a fair point because, as you said, James Marsden's good in the role. Underutilized in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so. He gets taken out early on and then doesn't show up until the end as like a brainwashed flunky of Stryker. So that's a fair point.
Stryker might also be part of the sour taste in my mouth from the movie.
You don't like Brian Cox?
I don't like... No, not as Stryker. When I think of Stryker from the X-Men franchise, he's not who I go to. So
all right. Well, for X-Men Origins Wolverine, many people say that it is the worst film. It might have competition with one other, or maybe 2 or 3 others now, actually, according to some people. But I liked this movie a lot when it came out because, I was in high school, I guess, and it was a movie about Wolverine, and it was cool. And it had other New Mutants and things, and his little task force of people that he had, and I much preferred Sabretooth in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
He was a huge step up, so I will say that for this movie. They had a great Sabretooth, and the way that he was in the plot and everything was good, but the plot itself is questionable at best, because he falls in love with this chick, but Stryker has her sister, so she fakes her death. And then Wolverine goes back to Stryker because he said that Sabretooth killed her. And then he sends out Wolverine after he puts the adamantium in him to go kill Sabretooth or something. And then he's like, oh no, he's unstoppable, let's kill him. Even though you just spent millions of dollars making him indestructible. Whatever. And then the whole Deadpool thing. Like, he was good at the beginning when he talked, but then they literally sewed his mouth shut and gave him, Cyclops powers and swords in his arms, and it just wasn't Deadpool. And lots of people have a problem with that. And then that kid as Cyclops, who... he did an okay job and everything, and there's that Patrick Stewart cameo, which is nice. But then they had Gambit in there as well, and he actually did okay in the role, but the fact that that's the only Gambit in an X-Men movie ever is very disappointing to most fans. And I don't have a lot to say more about this. It's a fun ride, and there's good action and stuff. It just isn't coherent. I would put the script on the level of like a Fast and Furious movie, and
Ouch.
that's not a compliment.
Okay, fair enough. It was a good movie when it came out. It's a movie that I've seen a lot of times for whatever reason.
Yeah,
And
but like you said about some of the earlier ones, I think for some reason this one did not age well either. And it is 10 years old at this point, but it has aged worse than some of the ones that are older than it, I think.
I think that might be Will.i.am, just a guess.
Yeah, him as a teleporting mutant. I forgot he was in it, actually.
Yep.
There's him, and then like the Blob was in it, and
That was rough.
yeah, kind of wasted for no reason. But okay, that's my number 9. We'll move on to number 8.
For number 8, I have The Wolverine. So
Okay.
it made it a little higher up on the list. I think I give it a little more credit because I am a fan of Japanese culture. So I enjoy the backdrop of Japan, but I do understand the nonsensical storyline. If you compared it, what was your comparison you just made for storyline for
Fast
script?
and Furious.
Fast and Furious. If that's Fast and Furious, this is maybe like Halo 2, the quality of storyline. But otherwise, it's interesting, and no, I think I'd mostly give it credit for the Japanese backdrop, because otherwise it does fail in some points. And I agree with the Silver Samurai. He could have been done a lot better. I think he would have been a lot more intimidating of a villain if he hadn't have been a dying old man, perhaps.
Absolutely. And that's fair. The Japanese culture did it a big favor. If it had been them just wandering around America, it would have been an intolerable movie.
Right.
But since it's not, it's a little bit better. And like I said, I don't hate the movie. I was just kind of bored by it at times.
Mm-hmm.
The atomic explosion in World War II scene is really cool. But the dreams about Jean Grey don't really mesh with the story as well. She just, interrupts at times and then leaves just as abruptly. So, I mean, I can understand you putting it higher, but...
Yeah, but not much higher. No, number 8 out of 10 is not a great placement still, so...
No, it's not. My number 8 is X-Men. The first one.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
Like your 2 entries before this, it's not that it's a bad movie. It's a good movie. But you were talking about aging. This movie is nearly 20 years old at this point. And watching it, you can tell. The effects were done before the new millennium came out. It was being made in 1999. And so you can very much tell in certain parts of this movie. And it's understandable because they didn't have like a huge budget and everything. But like the way that Senator Kelly melts or whatever, that's not very convincing. And Wolverine on a motorcycle at one point is just laughable at how terrible that CGI is. He's clearly on a green screen. But, I mean, there are very good parts to it. The opening of the movie with Magneto as a child is very powerful. In World War II, he's at a concentration camp. That's a great way to start the entire series. And then it cuts to, well, I was going to say the modern day, but it's supposedly in the not-so-distant future. And it cuts to grown Magneto and Charles, and they're, just after the Senate hearing about whether they should register mutants and everything, and they're there having a philosophical debate. And that's a brilliant scene with 2 brilliant actors, obviously. And Magneto's walking away, and he goes, "We're the future, Charles, not them." And just little things like that. So those 2 were nailed. Cyclops was good in this movie. He was used in this movie. Unlike the other 2 original trilogy films, he was used as an actual character And Jean Grey was not done justice, I think, in this first movie. I understand maybe they were doing that on purpose so that they could build her up in the next one and everything, and then Storm had her weird African accent for this one movie, and then didn't have it for the rest of the movies, except for when they were younger, but we'll get to that later on, I guess. Sabretooth, as I said, was not good in this movie. He was just a mindless beast, and it doesn't flow at all with the continuity of X-Men Origins Wolverine. That shouldn't be this movie's fault, I understand, but at this point, the timeline was all on one track, and so Sabretooth should definitely have remembered Wolverine unless he just went feral out in the wilderness somewhere or something. I understand how Wolverine doesn't remember him, but it should go the other way. But Mystique was well done in the movie. She was threatening and, no pun intended, but mysterious and everything. Rogue, however, was not Rogue in any way, shape, or form from the comics. She's supposed to be, the same age as the other people that were teachers at the school, and she doesn't use her powers to their full extent. A lot of people wanted her to still have the, at the time, Ms. Marvel powers of flight and super strength and all that sort of thing, where she had absorbed those semi-permanently, at least for some time. But instead, she was not, and she was kind of just a whiny kid and had to be saved all the time. I'm talking a lot of bad about the movie. I didn't dislike the movie at all. It just, like we'll talk about later, some people might have problems with newer movies about, well, they didn't get that character exactly right. And that's a fair point of the newer movies, but if you're going to make them there, then you could say the same for the original. They nailed Magneto, nailed Professor X, but you're telling me that that's Rogue or that's Sabretooth or something like that? And so I feel like that's a fair critique of the movie. Other people will say that it's not because... and I don't want to underplay the importance of this movie either, because this movie was the sole reason for the kickoff of the new superhero movie craze. We did have Blade in '99, but that was rated R, and there weren't huge Blade fans running around everywhere. This was the first actual big property that was turned into a superhero movie. Was the X-Men. They had the cartoons, the comics were the most popular in the Marvel brand, and so this movie doing well is what kicked off Spider-Man, is what kicked off the MCU, really. So if you like the Avengers movies, think X-Men.
Alright, sounds good.
That was number 8, so on to number 7.
Number 7, for me, we've got X-Men Origins Wolverine. So it did come up. You treated it a little harshly, and that's fine. It probably deserves it. But it's, again, it was an enjoyable movie when it came out. It has some weird parts to it. Whenever they've got that team together back in the day and they're out in the jungle looking for adamantium, for meteorites, and there's some parts of the movie that you could probably throw away and you wouldn't miss it at all. But there are other parts. Go ahead.
Well, I don't want to interrupt too much, but you talked early about the movie, and that reminded me of the brilliant opening credits scene. Everyone agrees, even though if they think the movie is terrible garbage, they still admit that the opening credits scene is amazing, of them fighting through history in all the wars. They fight in the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and everybody loves that part, and it's very well done.
It is. And to that point, I think one of the reasons that I do like the movie pretty well is because of the origin story, which sometimes in superhero movies, origin stories kind of ruin it, and they get told too many times over and over in Spider-Man, and they just, you lose interest in it. But in this, it's really interesting to see some of the origin, and honestly, if the whole movie were more origin-based, and if you got more than just the opening credits scene of the history of Sabretooth and Wolverine, it would probably be even more of an enjoyable movie than it was.
It is right in the name.
That's true. So they didn't quite live up to the title, perhaps. And I agree with the Deadpool comments from earlier, and not necessarily just that it was Deadpool and that it wasn't really his character, but that it was almost a literally faceless villain. They disfigured his face enough anyway. And that's who they fight. I mean, that's the big dramatic scene at the end on 3 Mile Island, and you're gonna have Wolverine and Sabretooth fight one guy
Well, that's fair.
and nearly lose even still.
But let me ask you this. You said you were talking earlier about Stryker and how the X2 one is not your Stryker. Is it this one?
It is, which is kind of strange maybe, and that still may have more to do with how many times I've seen the movie. But for me, he pulls off a angry military persona better than the other guy who seems like an angry psychiatrist maybe. I don't know.
Very accurate.
Yeah. So he seems like the angry psychiatrist that's trying to fix Logan in X2, but this one does it a little better for me.
Okay, that's fair. That's probably not as bad as how high I put Iron Man 2 on my other list, but same concept.
Right.
Number 7, I have X-Men Apocalypse. Now, when this came out, a lot of people didn't like it that much, but it's not that bad, people. It's really not. I understand the critiques of the movie. Apocalypse himself was sort of a weak villain, I will admit that. They kind of wasted Oscar Isaac somehow.
Yeah, that's true.
The opening scene, I liked. I thought it was indicative of Stargate, which is one of my favorite franchises of all time. So that was good. This is where the decade hopping got out of hand for me, because it's 30 years removed from First Class at this point, and no one has aged a day.
Right.
I understand that that's passable for some people, but, Beast should look older, or at least Professor X. Somebody should. And Beast should be blue most of the time. I understand Nicholas Hoult is a good actor. I like him in the role and everything, but, be blue. Come on.
Same thing for Jennifer Lawrence.
It didn't start in this movie, but it is out of hand at how much Jennifer Lawrence is in the movie as herself. I understand that she's probably the most famous person in the movie at the time that it came out, but do the role, In the original trilogy, Rebecca Romijn, she did it for every scene that it required her to do it.
All except one scene, 2 scenes.
Yeah, and that was when it was appropriate for the story.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, in Apocalypse, I like the younger kids coming in. I don't maybe necessarily like all the choices. I don't think that Nightcrawler and Storm should have been part of the kids coming in. I'm a purist, so the way I wanted it was to have it be, the actual First Class as well as it could be. Because in the comics, it was Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Iceman, and Angel. And they went back and did it, the movie team, because in the first X-Men, we had Scott, Jean, and Storm. And so they used that as well. And then for Nightcrawler, for some reason, even though he wasn't there until X2, but I understand the timeline changed at this point, so I'm not complaining about that. I'm just complaining about maybe the choices of characters. But they did have Angel in this movie, and that's good because, the whole Archangel connection with Apocalypse is a big part of Angel's storyline. They just didn't talk about Angel at all in the movie.
Nope.
He was literally just there and then grew metal wings and then was owned time and again.
Did he live through the movie?
I imagine so, but I couldn't tell you because they don't care enough to tell you. I don't think. I know Psylocke did because...
She kind of limps off.
Yeah, Olivia Munn is, a semi-famous actor. I mean, she's more famous than I'll ever be. But, she was kind of big at the time, so they're like, maybe we want to keep her around for one. But no, they apparently didn't. But I liked Sophie Turner as Jean Grey. She was introduced in this movie. I liked the way she used her powers. She made illusions and stuff, made people see things or not see things that were there. And the Quicksilver scene I liked. I just didn't like how it was, at the same time, the scene where they killed off Havoc. Like, that should have carried a lot of emotional weight, but instead it was, sweet dreams are made of these. And so, I go back and forth on that. I liked that they had, what's her name? Moira McTaggart back.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually aged, guys. They put makeup on her and made her older. So thank you for that. But I liked her being back, and, Havoc. There's that gloriously cheesy line whenever they're in Cerebro and it's being taken over and everything, and Charles looks over at him and says, "Wreak havoc," and then he just starts blasting everything, and then, dies shortly after. But I didn't love what they did with Magneto in this movie. I understand that they wanted him to have some sort of motivation to turn extra evil again and be one of the Horsemen and work with Apocalypse, but him having a random family didn't jive well with me when they could have made him have an actual family, and, like, his daughter could have been Polaris, like it is in the comics, and that she could have, not died but been taken away or something. They could have been at least semi-accurate, but instead they created these characters literally just to kill them off 15 minutes later.
You gotta feel bad for Eric for that.
I
they're
do.
gonna write him in a family and just kill him off.
I do feel bad, and that's not to say that the scene wasn't well done. He is a brilliant actor in that scene. I like Michael Fassbender as Magneto a lot. And he did well in that death scene of being very tortured and, yelling up to the sky. Is this what I am? Is this what you want from me? That sort of thing. I liked Charles as well when he's, taking over. When Apocalypse was using him to take over every mind on the planet, and he's making him send a message to everyone, and he's like, I'm going to rule everything, or whatever. I forget the exact phrasing. But then at the end, Charles is like, and those who are stronger protect those who aren't, or something. And he doesn't say Apocalypse's words, but instead tells the entire world, like, you need to look out for each other. And Apocalypse is like, whatever, I'm going to win. He doesn't do anything to punish him or anything, but he's like, okay, we're done. You're not talking to people anymore. But I really liked that. I mean, that's very, very Charles Xavier to me. And there's one part, this is a very, very small thing, but earlier in the movie when Scott, he gets the glasses that protect people from his laser beams and everything, but Jean was talking to someone, and she said, I think it was after her nightmare, she was talking to Professor X, and she said, you don't know what it's like to be scared to close your eyes, to be trapped inside your own head. And I thought for sure that later in the movie, to build their relationship closer together, Scott would have said, not knowing what Jean said earlier, but he would have said to Jean, you don't know what it's like to be afraid to open your eyes, to be trapped inside your own head. That would have been very, very powerful and a very good connection to those characters. And I'm just a nitwit out here in the Midwest or whatever, and I can write that line, so why didn't you? I mean, a lot of people have other problems with the writing of Apocalypse, but I thought it wasn't that bad. So I put it at number 7. If you haven't watched it since it came out, go back and watch it with maybe fresher eyes, and you probably appreciate it more. You talked about 7, right?
I talked about 7, yeah.
All right.
Origins Wolverine.
Number 6.
Number 6. Well, I don't think I'd get any heat for this one, but at number 6, I'm putting Dark Phoenix.
Okay, well that's an interesting choice because at number 6 I have Dark Phoenix.
Wow. That's coincidence, huh?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
let's dig into Dark Phoenix.
Dark Phoenix. I think this is probably, I think I can speak for both of us, but I enjoyed Dark Phoenix more than the average person did, evidently.
I would agree. I enjoyed the movie, and I came out of there thinking, people will probably be okay with this sort of thing. They were not.
No.
They were not at all. Although the showing that I went to was very sparse.
Mm-hmm.
That's a nice way to put it, I guess. There were maybe 15 people in the whole theater.
We showed up 45 minutes early for what reason?
To get warm in your seat, I guess.
Yep.
But I really, really liked the beginning of this movie. First of all, there's a brilliant joke that maybe other people in other theaters laughed at, but, as I said, my showing was very sparse, and so there's that report about the spaceship failing or whatever, the shuttle, and then Beast looks over at Charles and he says, "I know what you're thinking," and Charles says, "Well, that's my trick."
Mm-hmm.
Like, very, very quickly, comedic timing, doesn't miss a beat. But then they go off on the space mission and they rescue all the astronauts and everything. And, Gene gets hit with the blast and everything. But I liked how they used everybody. Like, they used Scott to shoot the thruster thing to make it stop spinning. And having a thing built into the jet where he can just blast stuff is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
But then, Nightcrawler and Quicksilver teleport over and do super fast stuff and then teleport back, and Storm makes it freeze over so they don't lose enough oxygen and everything, and then Jean obviously helps with that. And then they come back, and while they're up on the mission and everything, people are watching. They're glued to their television screens. People all around the world love the X-Men. And I love that part of the movie, because they that's how it should be. The X-Men should be public figures. People know about them, and they know, oh, the X-Men went on this mission and they saved people. And then when they land, they have like a big group of fans with signs and everything.
I did think that was neat. This seems like at least the first movie that we've been able to see the X-Men as heroes, if only for a moment.
Yeah. They weren't, I know that's part of their whole storyline of, being outcasts of society and being hated and feared as mutants.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the whole point of the X-Men. Like Charles says, they need to be public figures that people can look to and be like, oh, we need the X-Men.
Right. But I also thought it was neat that they were told that they were one bad PR day away from being the villain again. And of course that does pan out in the movie. So
that pans out in the movie, and that panned out in real life.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
His words, he didn't know how true those words were, because all it took was one bad day, because after Days of Future Past, they were on a high. That was like the highest grossing, the most critically acclaimed X-Men movie, and then Apocalypse came out, and despite all the money it made, it was very, very poorly received by critics, and fans also didn't seem to like it. And so they were just one bad movie away from the top to where they ended up with Dark Phoenix, because nobody liked Apocalypse, it seems like. And so then they're like, oh, that thing that's a sequel to the movie I didn't like? No, I'm not going to go see it. And so Dark Phoenix didn't even open at number 1 and, has like a 20-something on Rotten Tomatoes. All the critics seem to hate it, but
it was cold.
I feel like the narrative on this movie was written before it even came out, though. Because people didn't like Apocalypse, because I don't know if everybody knew about the Disney merger and everything, but Disney bought Fox, and they're going to reboot the X-Men into the MCU for not for another 5 or 10 years even. But people know that it's coming, and so it was kind of a lame duck movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they know it's on the way out.
Why bother?
But they made it, and so they're obligated to put it out in theaters. And so people were like, I'll catch it sometime in the next 10 years before the X-Men pop back up. And so I feel like people were unfair to this movie. And also, it was shuffled around the schedule. It wasn't supposed to be in the middle of summer with all this high competition.
Mm-hmm.
It was supposed to be in the slower time. So I feel like if it had stayed there, it would have dominated a bit more. But
as far as things not just in the overworld, but things within the movie, there were some great scenes in it. The space shuttle scene was great. The train scene toward the end is great.
That train scene is a great, great thing. I know they did reshoots to like restructure the whole finale, but I think it was worth it because the train scene was very impressive.
It was.
And they were really pushing that PG-13 rating with some of those kills they were pulling off.
Right. The one thing that, well, I guess this is a two-part thing, but What annoyed me was that this movie did a lot to tear apart the X-Men. In the last film that this cast is going to be together anyway, it kind of separates them from, oh, okay, well now everybody's just mad at Charles. And there were times in the movie that I even got annoyed with Raven and her character and thinking, I mean, I know this is you half the time and you will probably go to Magneto and that's fine, but she draws Beast away and everybody's just mad at each other, and it's a very sad way to end out the last film in the X-Men series.
Yeah, I mean, that is... People get mad at Charles sometimes in the comics for stuff that he does too, but I particularly thought that Beast's characterization was not well done for parts of it. Like, he didn't seem like Beast to me. It seemed like we need a character to be against Jean, and since Beast liked Raven and she killed Raven, it'll be him. But that's not who Hank is. Like, at the beginning of the movie, it said, which I didn't like the car crash scene, but I liked Charles talking to Jean after that. I thought they did a good job in that scene. But she came to the mansion in 1975, and it's 1992 at this point. Hank watched this little girl grow up. He's not going to want to murder her.
Right.
That's not who Hank McCoy is. So they fixed it by the end of the film when he stood up and protected her and everything, but for a while he was just blinded by rage for this girl that, I mean, I guess we're supposed to infer that they had been in a relationship since Apocalypse, maybe? Him and Raven, but I didn't buy that Hank would do that. Magneto, again, I like Michael Fassbender. He did well with what he was given, but he wasn't in the movie a lot. And so he was underutilized, I thought, in this one. But, I mean, how are you going to get him in there to begin with? But I liked the fight with him and some of his cronies outside of a building in New York with the X-Men. I thought that was a pretty good fight and displayed some good powers and things. Storm called up a little blizzard, and Cyclops bounced his laser beams off of a car, which hasn't really been shown in the movies at all, but he does that all the time, bounces off of stuff. Let us not forget the Dazzler cameo. It's the first time Dazzler's been in an X-Men movie.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the last for a decade or so.
Right. There's plenty of one-off... We usually talk about one-off villains when it comes to superhero movies, but when it comes to the X-Men franchise, there are one-off heroes a lot of the time, or one-off villains, but just one-off mutants.
Yeah, I mean, pick your poison in any of these movies that we've talked about here. X-Men Apocalypse had Psylocke, like I just talked about in the last entry, but she's not in any other X-Men movie. And so Dazzler had much less screen time than Psylocke, but was technically in this movie. So what do you think about Dark Phoenix?
It also, on the whole, felt a bit rushed to me, which maybe that was just them trying to wrap some things up, but it didn't feel like it had enough time to actually develop the story for this movie, and maybe not enough time to actually wrap up the series.
That's fair. I would have liked at least one more movie with Jean before she went through this, because as it stands, we had one movie. We had Apocalypse, and she was at best a secondary character in the movie, but possibly even a tertiary character, depending on who you ask. So, for us to try and be so heavily emotionally invested in Dark Phoenix doesn't really make sense. I get that it's a big story from the comics and you want to tell it, but like you said, you can't rush into that. You have to earn it, and they didn't really do that, I don't think.
Maybe that's why they need to be under the Disney umbrella. They're a little too...
Yeah, some people say they shouldn't even try the Dark Phoenix storyline ever, though, because they already did it twice and messed it up, but I don't think that's the case. I mean, they reboot stuff all the time. But
1, 2, 3 on Spider-Man has worked out pretty well so far. So.
Yeah, third time's the charm. So there you go.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say the very valid point about this movie is the villains, in that they don't have them, essentially.
Right.
They're weird aliens that shapeshift and are made of wood. Maybe it seems like, but probably not.
Is it the Skrull? The White Martians? Who is it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's
Gotcha.
an amalgamation of all that, and they don't have their motivations fully explained. And I get that that's bland and poor writing and everything, but I was more invested in the heroes. That wasn't a huge detriment to me personally because of the way that the heroes were in the movie, but I understand that is a valid criticism of not having any villains really, because they wanted to try and have it both ways. Because if your villain is just Jean, then she's so irredeemable that they can't fix her at the end, which some would argue is the point of the Dark Phoenix storyline. But they tried to make her a hero and a villain, so they ended up not really doing that at all. And if you have half a villain on one side, then you have half a villain on the other side, and half a villain does not a good movie make.
Right. And for whatever reason, Magneto didn't even fulfill that role in this film.
Yeah, he tried for like a minute, but then
Right.
he, like Beast, decided to switch back sides. So,
It
and I assume this is the same timeline as the end of Days of Future Past, but we'll get to that later on.
Right.
So, number 5. We're in the top 5 now.
Top 5.
This is the
Number
top
6 took a while.
half of X-Men movies in general. So, for number 5, I have X-Men The Last Stand.
For number 5, I have X-Men, the original.
Okay.
So X-Men, the original, that is, it was good. On a recent rewatch, though, I was watching it and recognizing how much background knowledge you really would need to have, because they introduce characters and they just assume, oh yeah, you know who that is. They explain Magneto with the beginning, but take Sabretooth, for example. How do you know who he is if you don't know who he is? They just expect you to understand, okay, that's who this is. And then they have some lame people in there too. Let me think. How about Toad? Let's go with Toad. Nobody asked for that, but in a 2000
Toad
era
is
movie...
is a very, very common antagonist to the X-Men, so
Yeah.
it's appropriate to start out with him.
I guess so. But it could have worked a little bit better. I'll give it the same criticism that I did with Dark Phoenix, too, in that it seems a bit rushed. The movie's hour 45 minutes, which I guess that may be a product of its time. But it does feel a little rushed, again, if you especially don't know the characters beforehand. Because it doesn't take them too long, it feels like, to get to the Statue of Liberty and to find out the plot and to stop the plot as well. So it does feel a bit rushed there. It's a very 2000s American movie. If the Backstreet Boys showed up in the middle of it, no one would be surprised. It's just not... It doesn't age well, and that's true for probably the whole original trilogy, but it certainly doesn't age as well as it could. And then also, and this is just maybe pettiness, but Rogue. Rogue is so bad in that movie. The acting is bad because I don't think she's actually Southern in any way, and she doesn't do a great job with the accent and with being a convincing anything. And they try to develop her and Wolverine's relationship, and it doesn't work. It doesn't. You should feel some kind of closeness there, and no. And then they try to develop some animosity between other characters, and that doesn't... There's just not a lot of good character development. I guess that's what I'm trying to say with all of that.
Although, when it has them both in Wolverine's truck, there is that really good part about... She asks, if it hurts when they come out, and he says, every time.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that that's an interpersonal developing. It's just a good line from Wolverine.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So, X-Men, I'm sure if I could go back and watch it in the year 2000, it would be a lot more impressive than it is today.
Oh, no doubt.
But that being said, it's going to stay right around number 5.
But that's not a bad placement.
It's not.
I put The Last Stand at number 5, which most people, well, not most people, but a lot of people say that it is the worst X-Men movie. I know that comes up a lot, but there's a lot of contenders that people have for worst X-Men movie. And I get why. I get the criticisms. Again, we talked about Dark Phoenix seeming rushed, but that was the whole movie, was the Dark Phoenix storyline. This is maybe a third of the movie is the Dark Phoenix storyline, and it's not even 2 hours of a movie. So there's not a lot of time left for that sort of thing. But they set it up at the end of the last one, so Jean came back. Due to, real world things, James Marsden had other commitments, so they killed off Cyclops almost immediately, which was terrible after they wasted him already in another movie. So, 1 out of 3 of the original trilogy movies has a good Cyclops character storyline. That's your first problem. Then they killed off Professor X in this movie too, which might have been the plan from the beginning, but that leaves Wolverine and Storm at the school. Now, I will say that this movie introduced Beast to the franchise. Canonically, he appeared before this in the past, but this was the first movie to come out with Beast, and Kelsey Grammer as Beast hit a home run. He nailed who Hank McCoy is. He's intellectual. He is very, well-spoken and that sort of thing. But then he also goes crazy in the fight at the end and slashes at people and stuff. And guess what? He wore the makeup the whole time, Holt. So take that. Anyway, they introduced the Mutant Cure storyline, which was a really good storyline from the comics and Joss Whedon's astonishing X-Men. And so they had that whole thing, and they tied it in with Angel, who was also introduced in this movie, but not nearly as nailed as they did with Beast. He's just kind of there. Just, so that they can check off that they had Angel in an X-Men movie. Colossus is one of my favorite X-Men of all time.
Too bad.
No. Don't say too bad, because this is the movie where he gets the most screen time.
Which is still 4 lines in the whole movie?
Maybe less. But he's there. He's in the final fight. He's, counted as part of the team. So I'm taking that as a win for Colossus fans everywhere. Shadowcat, Kitty Pryde, is also one of my favorites. She was technically in other movies, but different actresses played her both times. And this time Ellen Page is in the role, and she's there as a full character. I didn't much care for the love triangle aspect of her and Iceman, but I liked her in general. Iceman, as we also talked about, got his full iced up moment in the end of the final fight and everything. He got full ice, and that hadn't been done yet, so that was cool. There were a bunch of mutants in the Brotherhood just randomly introduced, like stupid Quill guy who just had tiny spikes all over him.
Right.
Literally hugged a lady to death. Ooh.
Yeah, I was
And
intimidated.
then Juggernaut, he's in the movie, but maybe not Juggernaut, but Magneto, again, he's very good in this movie. Ian McKellen's always great. He's got Pyro with him, and they're out in the woods with everybody, and they find Jean, and they get her, and then there's that whole thing where he lifts the Golden Gate Bridge. It shows how powerful he is. And, it's a good movie. It's not that long of a movie, so you're not committed to it for much. And, it's just fun. They have the danger room at the beginning. So I understand where people see shortcomings and, like, the writing and cohesion of it all. But it's just a good ride with good parts added in. Like, you get Kelsey Grammer's Beast. Like I said, people bash episode 1 of Star Wars, but that's the only place where you get Liam Neeson's Qui-Gon Jinn. So it's a better movie for it, and I think the same is true for Last Stand.
I agree. It's not come up on my list yet, so that means I've got it even a little bit higher, which is probably not a popular view, but...
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
So, number 4?
Number 4. For me, number 4 is X-Men Apocalypse.
Okay. For me, number 4 is Logan.
Okay. So those are far apart, but X-Men Apocalypse. It's well, honestly, it's one that I've watched more recently because I did a recent rewatch of it, and it is a good movie. It's a solid X-Men movie in my viewing. I can still agree with some of the negative points in that if you have Poe Dameron as your main villain and you can't tell him from a stump, then you probably didn't utilize him in the best way possible. So that's kind of an issue. I liked Storm in the movie. Strangely enough, I liked her development. I liked getting to see, I guess you'd call it an origin for her.
Mm-hmm.
I liked Charles in this one. And it was kind of strange to not have Charles and Eric going as much head-to-head. They were on opposite sides, but Eric was just kind of a pawn for most of the movie as one of the Horsemen. Which I will say that the Horsemen, you might as well pick them out of a hat as far as, finding the most powerful mutants to serve Apocalypse. No, you found Angel.
2 out of 4, maybe?
Yeah. Storm, I don't know about that. And of course, we've had our complaints with Jennifer Lawrence, and a lot of people have complaints with Sophie Turner. But I did like the ancient Egypt aspect. I guess that's kind of like with the Wolverine. I like some foreign culture, so I like seeing Japan. I like seeing ancient Egypt here. They could have even done more with that, spent a little more time in ancient Egypt or tied to that mythology. But even still, it was a very neat way to do it, and as some would call it, massively entertaining. As I look at the case of the movie right now, I don't know about massively entertaining, but I did find it entertaining. So
I did. I found the wanton destruction at the end with Magneto ripping up cities a little much.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then he just walks away, like no prosecution or anything.
Right.
But I did really appreciate the ending of that movie where they're in the danger room and they all have their pretty accurate comic book suits.
Mm-hmm.
And, Eric and Charles are over there and they're rehabbing their conversation from the first X-Men movie about whenever, someone's going to come for you at the school to keep you up at night. And he says, I feel a great swell of pity for the men coming to my school looking for trouble.
Right. And, I mean, it's a whole lot of X-Men is just kind of cheesy, and a lot of it's just, hey, did you hear what we did right there? But anytime I see those two playing chess or having a witty conversation, or anytime I see the once and future king pulled out, I mean, that's great for me. So
yeah, I agree. I put Logan up here. I've seen it more recently than you have, I guess, and so it resonated with me. I'll go ahead and say I am very squeamish, so I do not like a lot of gory violence. And there were some moments in the movie that were a little much for me, but on the whole, it actually was okay for me. And I'm very touchy about that sort of thing. So I was surprised that I was able to stomach the movie as well as I did. And so I think it helped me enjoy it a lot more. And I really appreciated the relationship between Logan and Charles and how it's been reversed and how he has to take care of Charles now, which is true to real life. At a certain point, you can't take care of yourself and have to rely on others to do so. And the only reason I don't have it higher is because it takes a while to get going. I understand that it's setting the scene and everything in this not dystopian future, but just like bland future maybe. I know it's its own thing and that it's very standalone compared to all the other X-Men movies, but it just takes a while to get up and running, and that can get old on repeated views, I think. And so, but I really, really liked X-23 in this movie. Dafne Keen, I believe this was her first role, and she just nailed it out of the park. She's a little younger than normally portrayed as X-23, I think, but she did a great job with it, and there's some excellent scenes in the movie. The scene where, Charles is having a seizure in the hotel, and Wolverine kills all those soldiers and everything, and then of course, at the end when he's fighting all of them with the super adrenaline in his system and all that sort of thing. It's very sad in other moments too, with Charles's death, and then Logan, of course, at the end, where that prophecy from the Wolverine comes true, according to the director anyway, about him dying with his own heart in his hand. And then the very last scene always gets me, where they're leaving his gravesite, and then Laura turns back and she's like, wait, and she turns the cross on its side and makes it an X. Like, oh, you know what to do. I mean, it's a very good standalone movie, but seeing as how this list is X-Men movies, I had to put some others just a little bit higher. Because I know, like, the Old Man Logan comic arc was very good and everything, but it's not the X-Men at the school doing missions, and that's what the X-Men is to me, at least, so.
Okay. So that's number...
That was number 4.
Number 4.
So we're on to the top 3.
Top 3. Okay, top 3, and this is my list. This is not anybody else's list. So I get to put The Last Stand at number 3.
I mean, it was the third one to come out, I guess.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, it even has Wolverine's claws on the front as the 3. So
yeah, 3 of them.
Yeah, it works out perfectly. But with The Last Stand, it may be the one that I've seen the most, actually, out of all of them. Probably so. And even though it's from 2006, and I'm not saying it's not dated, because it is, but I think it holds up okay, at least compared to the other 2 in this trilogy, and maybe even like to X-Men Origins Wolverine, like we said. So I enjoy it, though, even going back and watching it, and I enjoy it every time I watch it, which that says a lot. But I also think that it is one of the better X-Men movies to show their teamwork, even though you're kind of missing some of the key X-Men by this point. But still, they at least for this moment get to work together, and it's very much black and white, except for Jean, at the end, where you have the battle lines drawn, and you hold this line, and it's the last stand. Overall, again, very rushed, very short movie. That's apparently a plague of many of the X-Men movies, but it's got some good scenes. It's got some powerful scenes. Wolverine trying to stop Jean. Magneto getting cured. That's a powerful scene. Then the hint that he might have his powers back later on. So there's some good stuff in it, even if it's not aged the best of any movie.
I would agree with that. For my number 3, I had X-Men Days of Future Past. Some people will probably think that's a little low, but I understand why, because this is a very, very good movie. It starts off in the dystopian future where we're on the run from Sentinels, and we have other mutants that we haven't seen before or since, like Blink and Bishop and that sort of thing. But we have ones... no one cares about him.
Yep.
But we have other ones that we care about, like Kitty and Iceman and Colossus and that sort of thing. And then they meet up with Professor X, Magneto, Wolverine, and Storm, and they come up with this plan of sending Wolverine's mind into the past to fix this future, which supposedly all comes from Mystique shooting Bolivar Trask, which is a direct result from Jennifer Lawrence's fame skyrocketing after the first movie she was in, after she got, her Hunger Games role. Yes, Mystique in the comics had a sort of role to play in that, but she wasn't like the crux of the entirety of the future like she is in this movie. But I liked the past scenes. I thought Wolverine talking with Xavier and trying to pull him out of his funk was good, and then they go and rescue Eric and have that Quicksilver scene that everybody loves in the movie. It's the first time you see Quicksilver, and so him going around and doing all the slow-mo stuff was really, really funny and really well done. And then they go and, they stop Mystique from killing him, but things go awry when Eric just tries to murder her. And then in the future, they have to fight off all the Sentinels and stuff, and you get some really great fights and usage of powers, like Colossus they don't call it the fastball special in the movie, but he basically does that with Blink, where she portals him up into the sky, and then he like just uses gravity, and it's great stuff. But then one of the best scenes in the movie to me is when Charles actually gets his powers back, and Wolverine has to like bulk him up and talk to him, and then he's like, I was a student and you helped me, and then he uses Wolverine's mind to talk to future Professor X, and that's a great scene because you have James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart together talking, and at the end Magneto drops a stadium and everything, and that can get a little convoluted when they're fighting Sentinels and stuff, but it's good. And then they talk Mystique out of killing him, and she just leaves, and the world knows that mutants exist at this point. And then Wolverine like drowns, but then he wakes up, and he's back in the future, and the school is there, and everyone's happy and safe, and you see Kelsey Grammer's Beast again, and he walks by, and then Jean and Scott are there after having died in the last stand, both of them. And then Professor X is also back, and he's in his hover chair and everything, and he talks to Logan, and he realizes, oh, you're back. We have a lot of catching up to do. So, I know I just kind of described the plot of the movie, but it's just really, really good acting, good character interactions with each other, despite the fact that they had to inflate Mystique's importance so much. I thought that they did a good job of, overall tracking of the movie, and it was very, very well done, and deserves to be as most people's favorite, as it is.
All right. Is that number 3?
That was number 3.
Okay, number 2.
We're in the top 2.
Yeah, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is fittingly X2 X-Men United.
Wow. That's not how it was on my list.
It was not.
It was not. My number 2 is X-Men First Class.
Okay. X2, as you said, I mean, some of the older movies don't age as much, but I think X2 ages better than some of the others. There's not a whole lot in there to make you kind of cringe or just take you out of it. And the Nightcrawler scene at the beginning, where he's attacking the White House, is fantastic. I mean, it shows you what he can do and what a threat he can be when he puts his mind to it. And the way that Professor X was used in the movie, he was a lot more important. Like in the first X-Men, he gets like poisoned by Cerebro or something and gets taken out for the last like 20 minutes or something. And it's really weird. But in this one, he is integral to the plot. He is the thing that Stryker is using to attack all of the mutants at the same time. But then Magneto brilliantly switches it around and uses him to attack every human, and he's going to kill all the humans if they don't stop him. I think Rogue was better in this movie because she was, more established, more sure of herself, that sort of thing. She still wasn't Rogue from the comics, but she was at least closer. I liked that they had Iceman more in this movie. He had a part in the first one, but he wasn't like a fully fleshed out character. And, Colossus had his first cameo in this movie, so that's something. But Wolverine attacking all the guys in the mansion when they come in is great. There's not, a believable amount of blood, like maybe Logan has for the scene, but it's a PG-13 movie, so what do you want to do?
I would say that Logan has an unbelievable amount of blood in some scenes.
I think that's how some magazines described it, yeah.
Yeah, unbelievable. Camera splatter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's, like we've said, the X-Men are about teamwork and being a team and about the school and everything. Other superheroes don't have that, but literally a major part of this movie is the school and them attacking the school. And then, at the end, they come together as a team of X-Men. You have Professor X, Jean, Storm, Cyclops, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Iceman, Rogue, and even Magneto and Mystique join them for a little bit in the final part. And so that's what makes it one of the better X-Men movies to me, is because they're all together and they're being a team of X-Men like they are in the comics all the time, but where it's harder to do in movies, it seems like, or they're reluctant to do it at least. They like to split people up for the majority of the film. And to be fair, they are split up in the middle of this film for a while after the attacks and everything. But they eventually do come back together and form a plan and execute that plan, and then, they save the school and everything. And then, like you said, it ends with the once and future king.
Mm-hmm. Always good. All right. My number 2, as I said before, is X-Men First Class, which is obviously one of the best X-Men movie, at least depending on who you ask. It has I don't know if interesting is the right word, but large cast of characters that most of whom we never see again, pretty typically of X-Men.
That's fair.
I like that it's a period piece because I always enjoy that, and actually pretty much all of the X-Men movies are period pieces.
A lot of them at this point are. There's a lot of decade hopping with these newer ones. So.
Right. So this one is one of the ones set a little bit farther back, though, or the farthest back of any of them. So it's neat to see that. It's neat to see the Cold War era stuff going on. And it's enjoyable to watch in the first place. It is enjoyable to rewatch. It has a lot of origins feel to it, because it is. It's the origin of the team, and it's enjoyable to see that. It's the origin of Eric and Charles's relationship. It builds very nicely on that. I think this has some of the best character development in the X-Men movies, and it's fun to watch. I like Beast in this movie. He's much more Beast-like. He's a lot more on the science side of things and not as feral as was described earlier. So he's enjoyable to watch. I think this might be my favorite movie with Eric because he is unsure of himself and is not just a jerk yet, like he will be later on. So that's neat to watch as well. And I liked Havoc when they used him.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a good character. And of course the scene at the end, the scene of on the beach and all of the Cuban Missile Crisis is very neat, very cool to put you back in that time period and handled very well. So
yeah, absolutely. We can go on to number 1, I guess, because for my number 1, I have X-Men First Class.
Wow, big surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for my number 1, I have Days of Future Past,
which I can't argue with, but since you just talked about First Class, I'll chime in as well with my thoughts. Absolutely, I love this movie. Love the period feel of it. As I said, Moira McTaggart is in this one, and so it's good to have that human connection. And she's going to bat for them with the CIA and everything. And Eric in this movie, like you said, hasn't gone full villain yet. But he kind of has, because you have that great scene, a couple of great scenes at the beginning of him literally just hunting Nazis. And it's fantastic.
Yep.
He goes to Argentina in that bar and has that great scene with those former Nazi guys, and he has that knife and stabs the guy's hand and then flings it into the other guy and then back into the guy's hand, which is a great way to get a blood disease, but he's going to die anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
But that all that is amazing. And like you said, the characterization was good. Banshee's in this movie. This is the only X-Men movie with Banshee so far. That's something. Hank is good, like you said. It's before he's all furry and everything. So he's got the feet like the original Beast. He had the opposable toes and everything. But then at the end, he gets the furry stuff when he gets that serum, and he looks great in this movie. I like how he looks in this one much better than the other Nicholas Hoult movies of him as Beast, where he literally just puts on a blue wig and blue face paint. This one actually looks like more an animal sort of thing, which I really, really like. but then he also flies a plane while looking like a big furry monster because he's smart and a scientist and everything. As I said, the school is important, the teamwork is important. The fact that they live at a school means that they learn. This is the only X-Men movie where they learn and train with their powers. Literally the only one, but they take the time to do it in this movie. They have Banshee screaming at things and learning how to fly with his screams. They have Beast learning how to use his feet to run faster and everything. They have Havoc training down in the basement, which, by the way, watch these movies over and over again, because it took me at least till the fifth time to realize that nuclear bunker that Havoc was training in turned into this fancy high-tech hallway with Cerebro and stuff underneath the mansion. Because it was already there, so they just put, med labs and all sorts of stuff down there in that hallway with all those doors and stuff. So watch these movies over and over again, and you'll pick up on stuff like that. But Havoc trains, and, even Mystique trains and stuff, and Eric, he moves a whole satellite dish, but only once Charles gets in his head and reminds him of some good things in his past. Mm-hmm. And he says, it's not just rage. You need to be between rage and serenity. And when you can achieve that, you'll be more powerful than anyone, even more powerful than me. So the only thing that holds Magneto back is because he's all rage all the time. If he were, like Charles said, more balanced, then he would be unstoppable. But he's kind of his own worst enemy in that regard. And I like that characterization is there, like you said. So, like I said, a lot in this. Fassbender is a great Magneto, but he's very, very good in this movie in particular. Mm-hmm. And the ending scene on the beach is great. He gets his revenge against Sebastian Shaw, where he moves the coin through his head, and that's a great scene. Emma Frost, great mutant in the comics, terribly underutilized in this movie. She was nothing like the character. She wasn't witty or anything like that. But at the ending scene on the beach, goes from them fighting the other mutants to all the humans being like, oh no, we need to fight them. But I like how everybody has something to do in that ending scene. Like, the plane sweeps in there, and they have to find the submarine. And so, Beast is like, well, we could find it if we had sonar. And then they look at Banshee, and they're like, we have sonar. And he jumps in the water and finds the sub. And then Magneto pulls the sub out of the water and throws it on the beach. Even Mystique has a thing where she stops Azazel from killing Beast by impersonating Sebastian Shaw. And Beast and Havoc are fighting all the other guys, and then Eric kills him. But then all the humans turn against him, and then Eric's like, I've seen men just following orders before. We're not going to do this. Magneto is by far the best comic book villain ever. Mm-hmm. I don't care about your Jokers. I don't care about your Dr. Dooms. Magneto is the best ever because you understand him completely. All you need to know is that he is a survivor of the Holocaust. He has seen this before, and he doesn't want it to happen again. And so, therefore, everything he does, no matter how terrible, is believable because you have that background. And so, him shooting all the missiles back at the humans, and then Eric trying to stop him is very, very powerful. And then, of course, Eric gets struck by a bullet, and he can't feel his legs anymore. And
Charles.
Yeah, sorry. Charles, and then Charles is on the beach, and Eric is holding him, and he says, we want the same thing, you and I. And Charles, with a tear in his eye, says, oh, my friend, we do not. And that's where they part ways, knowing that they want what's best for mutant kind, but they each approach it differently. And that's the start of this whole thing, really. Mm-hmm. And so I just think that this movie nails the X-Men tone and the dichotomy between Charles and Eric, but it also puts heavy importance on the school and, learning to use your powers like they should, but this is the only one that does that. So to me, it pulls off being an X-Men movie the best.
That's fair. And It is certainly in the top 2 X-Men movies. Speaking of the importance of the school, what about Days of Future Past? Just kidding. They don't use the school.
A little, maybe. But
It shows up, but they're not there most of the time. And that's... Yeah, I think Days of Future Past is the one that a lot of people put at the top of the list because compared to First Class, it's more fun, or it's more something. And it's more epic, certainly, in its scale.
I'll give you that for sure.
It's not just the fate... I mean, I guess the fate of the world hangs in the balance, kind of, but this is the fate of all worlds. It's the fate of multiple timelines. It's the fate of everything. So it has that for it. It's another period piece, too. It's different.
The 70s.
It's right. And I guess it's 2 period pieces, really, because it's also a dystopian future.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, if you want to count it that way. But I love the multiple cast. If they had not done that in any of the movies, I think everyone would have regretted it, whether or not they'd recognized it.
Yeah, that was a huge draw.
It is. And that probably for me, that's the reason that it has to be my favorite, because it does pull both of these casts together of incredible actors and then, of course, incredible mutants in the franchise. It's like if Star Trek Generations had been on a larger scale, this is what it would have been. It would have felt like this. That also makes it maybe a tad confusing, at least the first time you watch it, because there's so much time travel that happens in it and so many people that are back that wouldn't necessarily be otherwise. I will agree with you on the Jennifer Lawrence Mystique role. It is annoying because have you heard any of the other names that are in the film? I think there's a few other stars that might make an appearance in it. And is Jennifer Lawrence knighted? I don't think so.
Yeah, there are 2 sirs in the film that have less screen time than her.
Right. And she steals the show, but not in the good way.
Ooh.
She steals it, though. She takes it away from maybe where it should go. So that is annoying. But I love the storyline, and it's a race against time, and it's working together in the future to save the past when they weren't working together. It's just a great way to do that. I like if you're going to have a one-off CGI villain, Sentinels are the way to go. I mean, there's no better X-Men villain that you could fight than that. So I thought that was a great a great villain to have in this film. Other than that, it has the best ending of any X-Men film.
That's very true.
It should have ended the series. Not they should have stopped with that movie necessarily, but I wish that could have been the last scene of the series because of how perfectly it pulled off everything. Brought back both casts together.
Which I guess technically, if you're watching chronologically, and not counting Logan, because that's a separate timeline, but...
Right. So in some universe, if you strung all these together, then that could be the last scene. But because of that, it makes a great wrap-up. So, great movie.
Speaking of great wrap-up, that's the end of the list right there. I can see all points of view on this. None of these movies are outright terrible to me anyway. You might disagree. Days of Future Past could be my number 1 tomorrow. These literally changed every day that I made the list. But I greatly, greatly enjoyed the X-Men franchise. As I said, this was the first major studio superhero film series. And so watching them when they came out, I loved it. Loved the X-Men. I've always loved the X-Men more than the Avengers from the comics. So it kind of makes me sad that the Avengers movies are so worldwide beloved and the X-Men movies aren't. Hopefully they can get that way once they join the Avengers movies and maybe could even overshadow the Avengers at some point if done correctly, because I know they have that capability. But who knows? We might revisit something about X-Men when New Mutants comes out, if it ever comes out.
If.
That's technically the last X-Men movie in this continuity, so I'm sure that will disappoint many, many people with however that turns out, if they actually get the reshoots. But let us know what your favorite X-Men movies are, what your least favorite things are. What's your favorite one-off mutant from any of these movies? What's your favorite mutant in general that maybe even hasn't appeared yet? Let us know. We'll see you in the not-too-distant future, I suppose.
Or past. Maybe.
Days of Future Past die again tomorrow forever.
Is that a James Bond title?
I think that's actually Jet Fusion from Jimmy Neutron.
Huh. Go figure.